Verses 14 to 19. Here is, Christ's public preaching in the temple. v14 He went up into the temple, and taught, according to his custom when he was at Jerusalem. His business was to preach the gospel of the kingdom, and he did it in every place of concourse. His sermon is not recorded, because, probably, it was to the same purport with the sermons he had preached in Galilee, which were recorded by the other evangelists. For the gospel is the same to the plain and to the polite. But that which is observable here is that it was about the midst of the feast, the 4th or 5th day of the 8. Whether he did not come up to Jerusalem till the middle of the feast, or whether he came up at the beginning, but kept private till now, is not certain. But, query, why did he not go to the temple sooner, to preach? Answer, 1. Because the people would have more leisure to hear him, and, it might be hoped, would be better disposed to hear him, when they had spent some days in their booths, as they did at the Feast of Tabernacles. 2. Because he would choose to appear when both his friends and his enemies had done looking for him, and so give a specimen of the method he would observe in his appearances, which is to come at midnight, MT 25:6. But why did he appear thus publicly now? Surely it was to shame his persecutors, the chief priests and elders. By showing that, though they were very bitter against him, yet he did not fear them, nor their power. See Isa 50:7, 8. By taking their work out of their hands. Their office was to teach the people in the temple, and particularly at the Feast of Tabernacles, Nah 8:17, 18. But they either did not teach them at all or taught for doctrines the commandments of men, and therefore he goes up to the temple and teaches the people. When the shepherds of Israel made a prey of the flock, it was time for the chief shepherd to appear, as was promised. Is 34:22, 23, MAL 3:1. His discourse with the Jews hereupon, and the conference is reducible to 4 heads. Concerning his doctrine. See here. How the Jews admired it, v15 They marveled, saying, How knoweth this man letters, having never learned? Observe here, that our Lord Jesus was not educated in the schools of the prophets, or at the feet of the rabbin, not only did not travel for learning, as the philosophers did, but did not make any use of the schools and academies in his own country. Moses was taught the learning of the Egyptians, but Christ was not taught so much as the learning of the Jews. Having received the Spirit without measure, he needed not receive any knowledge from man, or by man. At the time of Christ's appearing, learning flourished both in the Roman Empire and in the Jewish Church more than in any age before or since, and in such a time of inquiry Christ chose to establish his religion, not in an illiterate age, lest it should look like a design to impose upon the world, yet he himself studied not the learning then in vogue. That Christ had letters, though he had never learned them, was mighty in the Scriptures, though he never had any doctor of the law for his tutor. It is necessary that Christ's ministers should have learning, as he had, and since they cannot expect to have it as he had it, by inspiration, they must take pains to get it in an ordinary way. That Christ's having learning, though he had not been taught it, made him truly great and wonderful. The Jews speak of it here with wonder. First, some, it is likely, took notice of it to his honor, he that had no human learning, and yet so far excelled all that had, certainly must be endued with a divine knowledge. Secondly, others, probably, mentioned it in disparagement and contempt of him. Whatever he seems to have, he cannot really have any true learning, for he was never at the university, nor took his degree. Thirdly, some perhaps suggested that he had got his learning by magic arts, or some unlawful means or other. Since they know not how he could be a scholar, they will think him a conjurer. What he asserted concerning it, 3 things. That his doctrine is divine, v16 My doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me. They were offended because he undertook to teach though he had never learned, in answer to which he tells them that his doctrine was such as was not to be learned, for it was not the product of human thought and natural powers enlarged and elevated by reading and conversation, but it was a divine revelation. As God, equal with the Father, he might truly have said, my doctrine is mine, and his that sent me, but being now in his estate of humiliation, and being, as mediator, God's servant, it was more congruous to say, my doctrine is not mine only, nor mine originally, as man and mediator, but his that sent me. It does not center in myself, nor lead ultimately to myself, but to him that sent me. God had promised concerning the great prophet that he would put his words into his mouth, do 18:18, to which Christ seems here to refer. Note, it is the comfort of those who embrace Christ's doctrine, and the condemnation of those who reject it, that it is a divine doctrine, it is of God and not of man. That the most competent judges of the truth and divine authority of Christ's doctrine are those that with a sincere and upright heart desire and endeavor to do the will of God. v:17 If any man be willing to do the will of God, have his will melted into the will of God, he shall know of the doctrine whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. Observe here, first, what the question is, concerning the doctrine of Christ, whether it be of God or no, whether the gospel be a divine revelation or an imposture. Christ himself was willing to have his doctrine inquired into, whether it were of God or no, much more should his ministers, and we are concerned to examine what grounds we go upon, for, if we be deceived, we are miserably deceived. Secondly, who are likely to succeed in this search? Those that do the will of God, at least are desirous to do it. Now see who they are that will do the will of God. They are such as are impartial in their inquiries concerning the will of God, and are not biased by any lust or interest, and such as are resolved by the grace of God, when they find out what the will of God is, to conform to it. They are such as have an honest principle of regard to God, and are truly desirous to glorify and please him. Whence it is that such a one shall know of the truth of Christ's doctrine. Christ has promised to give knowledge to such. He hath said, he shall know, and he can give an understanding. Those who improve the light they have, and carefully live up to it, shall be secured by divine grace from destructive mistakes. They are disposed and prepared to receive that knowledge. He that is inclined to submit to the rules of the divine law is disposed to admit the rays of divine light. To him that has shall be given, those have a good understanding that do his commandments, PS 111:10. Those who resemble God are most likely to understand him. That hereby it appeared that Christ, as a teacher, did not speak of himself, because he did not seek himself, v:18. First, see here the character of a deceiver, he seeketh his own glory, which is a sign that he speaks of himself, as the false Christs and false prophets did. Here is the description of the cheat, they speak of themselves, and have no commission nor instructions from God, no warrant but their own will, no inspiration but their own imagination, their own policy and artifice. Ambassadors speak not of themselves, those ministers disclaim that character who glory in this that they speak of themselves. But see the discovery of the cheat, by this their pretensions are disproved, they consult purely their own glory, self-seekers are self-speakers. Those who speak from God will speak for God, and for his glory. Those who aim at their own preferment and interest make it to appear that they had no commission from God. Secondly, see the contrary character Christ gives of himself and his doctrine, he that seeks his glory that sent him, as I do, makes it to appear that he is true. He was sent of God. Those teachers, and those only, who are sent of God, are to be received and entertained by us. Those who bring a divine message must prove a divine mission, either by special revelation or by regular institution. 2. He sought the glory of God. It was both the tendency of his doctrine and the tenor of his whole conversation to glorify God. This was a proof that he was true, and there was no unrighteousness in him. False teachers are most unrighteous, they are unjust to God whose name they abuse, and unjust to the souls of men whom they impose upon. There cannot be a greater piece of unrighteousness than this. But Christ made it appear that he was true, that he was really what he said he was, that there was no unrighteousness in him, no falsehood in his doctrine, no fallacy, nor fraud in his dealings with us. They discourse concerning the crime that was laid to his charge for curing the impotent man, and bidding him carry his bed on the Sabbath day, for which they had formerly prosecuted him, and which was still the pretense of their enmity to him. He argues against them by way of recrimination, convicting them of far worse practices. v. 19. How could they for shame censure him for a breach of the law of Moses, when they themselves were such notorious breakers of it? Did not Moses give you the law? And it was their privilege that they had the law. No nation had such a law, but it was their wickedness that none of them kept the law, that they rebelled against it, and lived contrary to it. Many that have the law given them, when they have it do not keep it. Their neglect of the law was universal. None of you keepeth it, neither those of them that were in posts of honor, who should have been most knowing, nor those who were in posts of subjection, who should have been most obedient. They boasted of the law, and pretended a zeal for it, and were enraged at Christ for seeming to transgress it, and yet none of them kept it, like those who say that they are for the church, and yet never go to church. It was an aggravation of their wickedness, in persecuting Christ for breaking the law, that they themselves did not keep it. None of you keepeth the law, why then go ye about to kill me for not keeping it? Note, those are commonly most censorious of others who are most faulty themselves. Thus hypocrites, who are forward to pull a mote out of their brother's eye, are not aware of a beam in their own. Why go ye about to kill me? Some take this as the evidence of their not keeping the law. You keep not the law. If you did, you would understand yourselves better than to go about to kill me for doing a good work. Those that support themselves and their interest by persecution and violence, whatever they pretend, though they may call themselves custodes utrius qui tabuli, the guardians of both tables, are not keepers of the law of God. Chemnitius understands this as a reason why it was time to supersede the law of Moses by the gospel, because the law was found insufficient to restrain sin. Moses gave you the law, but you do not keep it, nor are kept by it from the greatest wickedness. There is therefore need of a clearer light and better law to be brought in. Why then do you aim to kill me for introducing it?